"You're being unreasonable, Lillian," Bradley said flatly, barely glancing up from his laptop as he slid documents into his sleek leather briefcase. His indifferent tone made my stomach twist, but I managed a faint smile. "My name is Lillian, and I'm 35 years old. I live what most people would describe as a comfortable life in Phoenix, Arizona. My husband, Bradley, works as a regional sales director for Nexora Labs, a pharmaceutical consulting firm. I handle our home and work part-time as a freelance graphic designer. For 8 years, I believed we had built a solid marriage grounded in trust, shared ambitions, and mutual respect. Bradley often traveled for business, sometimes for 3 or 4 days at a stretch, meeting clients across the Southwest. I never questioned it. His job gave us a beautiful house in Scottsdale, 2 luxury cars, and enough financial freedom for me to pursue my creative passions without a full-time corporate grind. But recently, something had changed. Bradley had become guarded with his phone, defensive about his schedule, and dismissive whenever I mentioned visiting him during his trips. When I suggested joining him for his upcoming Palm Springs conference, a chance to spend some time together, his reaction was unexpectedly sharp. "Absolutely not," he snapped. "This isn't a getaway, Lillian. I'll be in meetings all day. You just sit around bored." His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. We used to travel together often in the early years of our marriage, turning even short business trips into small adventures. Now, the very idea seemed to annoy him. "I wouldn't mind," I said quietly. "I could work on my designs or explore while you're busy. We haven't spent time together lately." "The company doesn't cover spouses," he replied curtly, stuffing another shirt into his suitcase. "And honestly, I need to stay focused, not distracted." That ended the conversation, but his tone lingered in my chest like a dull ache. When had I become a burden to him? When had my company turned from welcome to unwanted? Now, as I watched him pack for yet another 3-day trip to Palm Springs, that uneasy feeling returned. He moved with practiced precision, folding his finest suits, packing his cologne, and including the expensive watch I'd gifted him last year. For a simple work conference, he seemed unusually concerned about his appearance. "Which hotel did you say you're staying at?" I asked lightly, pretending to sort papers on my desk. "The same one as usual," he answered without looking up. "Desert Palms Resort, the one where the pharmaceutical conferences are held." I nodded, though his tone sounded rehearsed. "And you'll be back Friday evening?" "Late Friday night," he said briskly. "Don't wait up. I really need this trip to go well. The company's been restructuring, and I need to prove my worth to the regional clients." The way he emphasized the word need made me study his face more closely. Bradley had always been successful at work, consistently ranking among the top in his division. So what kind of changes was he referring to? And why hadn't he mentioned them before? "Is everything okay at work?" I asked. "You seem more tense about this trip than usual." For a brief second, something flickered across his expression. Anxiety, maybe guilt. But it vanished so quickly that I almost doubted I saw it. "Everything's fine," he said. "Just the usual corporate pressures. Nothing for you to worry about." That phrase had become his go-to response whenever I asked about his job, his travels, or honestly, most parts of our life together. When had he started treating me like someone too fragile to handle reality? After he left for the airport that Thursday morning, I wandered through the house feeling strangely unsettled. The silence felt heavier than normal, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Bradley had been acting differently for months, but I'd brushed it off as work fatigue, or maybe a midlife phase. Yet, watching him pack so meticulously, avoiding my eyes when I asked about the hotel, left me with an uneasy suspicion I didn't want to face. I tried to focus on my design work, a logo project for a small restaurant chain, but my thoughts kept drifting. Finally, I gave up and did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and searched for the Desert Palms Resort in Palm Springs. The website displayed a beautiful upscale property, sparkling pools, manicured gardens, and elegant meeting spaces. It looked exactly like the kind of venue a pharmaceutical company would choose for a regional conference. But as I browsed through the photos, something about it didn't sit right. Maybe it was how Bradley had packed his best clothes. Maybe it was how firmly he'd insisted I stay home. Or maybe it was the guarded way he'd answered my questions. Months of emotional distance had turned our marriage into unfamiliar territory. Whatever it was, it pushed me toward a decision I never thought I'd make. I began planning a surprise visit. The thought of showing up at his hotel unannounced felt both exciting and terrifying. In 8 years of marriage, I'd never done it. I'd always respected his work boundaries, trusted his need for space, and believed in giving him the independence he valued. But lately, that trust had started to crack. The man I once knew felt like a stranger, and I needed to know why. Friday morning, I stood in front of my closet, uncertain what to wear for the 3-hour drive to Palm Springs. I chose a light sundress, casual yet flattering, something that could work for both travel and dinner, assuming Bradley would be free that evening. My hands trembled slightly as I packed an overnight bag, reminding myself that this was my husband. Surprising him shouldn't feel like such a gamble. The long drive through the Arizona desert gave me too much time to think. I rehearsed how I'd greet him, imagining his surprised grin, his laugh, the way he'd shake his head and call me crazy in that affectionate tone he used when we were dating. Maybe we'd have dinner, sit by the pool, and I'd remember what it felt like to be close again. But another part of me, the one I tried to silence, kept whispering darker thoughts. What if he wasn't alone? What if there was a reason he didn't want me there? What if this distance between us wasn't just about work? I pushed those thoughts away and focused on the road, watching the desert fade into the green calm of Palm Springs. The Desert Palms Resort was easy to spot. A wide, elegant complex surrounded by palm trees and desert flowers. The parking lot was full, which seemed right for a conference weekend, and I felt some of my tension ease. This looked exactly as Bradley had described, a professional, business-appropriate setting. At the front desk, a friendly young woman greeted me with a bright smile. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for my husband," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Bradley Morrison. He's attending the pharmaceutical conference." She typed into her computer, then frowned slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "We don't have any pharmaceutical conferences scheduled this weekend." My heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" He mentioned he was attending a Nexter Labs conference here. The receptionist checked her computer again and shook her head. "No corporate events scheduled this weekend, ma'am." She paused, then added, "But we do have a guest by that name." Room 237, a rush of heat filled my ears as I tried to make sense of her words. No conference. No business trip. Just Bradley, staying at an upscale resort for reasons he hadn't told me. "Could you please call his room?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd like to surprise him." "Of course," she replied, dialing the extension. After a few rings, she hung up, no answer. "Would you like to leave a message?" "That's all right," I said quickly. "I'll go up and wait for him." We were planning to have dinner anyway. The elevator ride to the second floor felt endless. My thoughts spun in circles, each explanation less convincing than the last. Maybe the conference had been postponed. Maybe he just wanted some time alone. But deep down, I knew something didn't add up. Room 237 was at the end of the hallway. I stood outside for what felt like forever, hand raised to knock but frozen in hesitation. A part of me wanted to walk away, to drive home and forget this moment ever happened. But I couldn't. I'd come too far. I knocked softly. No response. A second time, still nothing. Finally, I tried the handle, not expecting it to move. It did. The door opened into a room that was clearly in use. Bradley's suitcase sat open on the rack, his clothes strewn about in a way completely unlike him. The bed was messy, and the air was thick with an expensive floral perfume, one I didn't wear. My stomach tightened as I stepped inside. Then I noticed it, a crumpled room service receipt on the nightstand. The timestamp read Thursday evening. The order, 3 dinners, 3 bottles of wine, and chocolate-covered strawberries. Dinner for 3. As I stood there, trembling, the sound of running water drifted from the bathroom, along with voices. Women's voices, laughing and talking freely, the tone unmistakably intimate. The shower was running. And Bradley wasn't alone. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of trust, dreams, and plans for the future, shattering in a single moment. I was standing in a hotel room, listening to my husband take a shower with women I'd never met, women he had apparently dined with the night before. From the easy tone of their voices, it was clear they were more than casual acquaintances. I should have left. I should have walked out of that room, driven home, and confronted him later. But I couldn't. I was frozen, holding the receipt that confirmed my worst fears, listening as my marriage unraveled in real time. When the water stopped, Their voices became clearer. I heard Bradley laugh, followed by a woman mentioning next time and the usual arrangement. That was the moment I realized I had two options: run away or uncover the truth about what my husband had really been doing on all those so-called business trips. I chose the truth. Quietly, I moved to the closet near the bathroom, positioning myself behind the slightly open door where I could see without being seen. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away, but I forced myself to stay calm. Whatever was about to happen, I needed to see it clearly to understand the full reality of my situation. The bathroom door opened. Bradley stepped out first, wearing a thick white hotel robe, looking relaxed and satisfied in a way I hadn't seen for months. Two women followed, both likely in their mid-20s, both stunning, both dressed in matching robes that barely covered their thighs. Their comfort around him spoke of habit, of an arrangement that had been repeated many times. Same time next month? Asked the brunette, tall and poised, with flawless makeup and styled hair that somehow survived the shower. Her accent was faint but noticeable, and she spoke like someone confirming a routine appointment. Absolutely, Bradley replied, pulling out his wallet. The 15th through the 17th, as always. The blonde, shorter but just as elegant, laughed. You know, Bradley, most of our clients don't book us for entire weekends. You must really enjoy your business trips. Bradley chuckled as he counted several $100 bills. What can I say? I believe in work-life balance. I covered my mouth to stop myself from gasping. Regulars. This wasn't a one-time lapse or a moment of weakness. It was a pattern, a practiced routine that had likely been going on for months, maybe years. Your wife still doesn't suspect anything? The brunette asked, taking the cash. Lillian, Bradley said with a dismissive tone that made my stomach turn, is completely clueless. Too busy with her little art projects to notice anything important. As long as I say it's business, she believes every word. The blonde began dressing, slipping into expensive lingerie that was clearly custom-made. Must be nice to have someone that trusting. It has its advantages, Bradley replied. She takes care of the house, keeps things running, never asks questions about expenses. Perfect setup, really. I felt sick. The way he reduced 8 years of marriage to mere convenience made me want to burst out and confront them all. But I stopped myself, maybe out of shock, or maybe out of a need to understand more before acting. Speaking of expenses, said the brunette, now wearing a designer dress worth more than my entire wardrobe. You're still running everything through the company, right? Same cards? Bradley nodded. Corporate card for all entertainment costs. My company's very generous about client relations. My blood ran cold. He was using his company's credit card for this. Not only was my husband cheating on me with escorts, but he was also committing fraud to fund it. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. If he had been billing these expenses to Nexora Labs, that meant he was stealing from his company. And as his wife, I could be held accountable for tax fraud on our joint returns. How long have you been doing this? The blonde asked, glancing at herself in the dresser mirror. About 3 years now, Bradley replied casually. Started locally, but the out-of-town trips are much better, more private, and the company covers the hotel anyway. 3 years. For 3 long years, he had been lying, cheating, and committing corporate fraud. Every business trip, every conference, every time he brushed off my questions or insisted I couldn't join him, he was maintaining this elaborate deception. Well, it's been lovely as always, the brunette said as she picked up her purse. Same girls next month or someone new? You two are perfect, Bradley replied smoothly. No reason to change what works. They exchanged air kisses like old friends. I watched in disbelief as my husband scheduled his next encounter as casually as if it were another business meeting. His composure, so casual, so familiar, so utterly devoid of guilt, told me everything I needed to know about the man he truly was. After the women left, Bradley moved efficiently around the room, collecting clothes, straightening the bed, and opening the windows to air out the perfume. He was clearly experienced at hiding his tracks. How many times had he done this? How many lies had he told me? I stayed hidden in the closet, barely breathing, as he prepared to return to his normal life, to come home to me with stories about dull conferences and demanding clients. The man I'd loved and trusted was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, he was a criminal using our marriage as cover for his crimes. But as I watched him erase every trace of his betrayal, something inside me shifted. The shock and heartbreak began to harden into something far more powerful: cold, calculated anger. Bradley thought I was too trusting, too naive to ever catch on. He believed he could continue this charade forever, stealing, lying, and using me as part of his act. He was about to realize just how wrong he was. When he went into the bathroom to shower, I quietly slipped out of the closet and started taking pictures with my phone. The rumpled bed, the room service receipt on the nightstand, the champagne glasses on the dresser. I photographed everything, making sure to include the room number, timestamps, and any evidence proving what had taken place. Then I left the room and headed for the elevator, already planning my next move. Bradley had made a fatal mistake in underestimating me. I wasn't the naive woman he thought he'd married. I was about to become his worst nightmare. The question wasn't if I'd expose him. It was how much damage I'd cause on my way out. I drove home from Palm Springs in a strange, focused calm. The 3-hour drive gave me time to process everything I'd seen and to start crafting my plan. By the time I pulled into our driveway in Scottsdale, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The first step was gathering evidence. Bradley wouldn't return home until late that night, giving me several uninterrupted hours to dig through our financial records. I had never paid close attention to our joint accounts or his business expenses, trusting him to manage that side of our marriage while I focused on my design work and our home. That trust, I now realized, had been a terrible mistake. I started in our home office, a space I rarely entered since Bradley had claimed it as his personal workspace years ago. His desk was perfectly organized with labeled folders and neatly arranged stacks of paperwork. As I began sorting through the documents, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The corporate credit card statements painted a picture I could hardly believe. Monthly charges at luxury hotels in cities across the Southwest, always during his supposed business trips. There were restaurant bills for lavish dinners meant for several people, and charges at spas, designer boutiques, and jewelry stores, they all disguised as client entertainment or business development costs. But what truly exposed the truth were the consulting service payments, monthly transfers of $2,000 to $5,000 to companies with names like Executive Wellness Solutions, Premier Client Services, and Sunshine Hospitality Consultants. When I added them up over 3 years, the total exceeded $85,000 in fraudulent expenses. My hands trembled as I photographed each document, building a digital record of Bradley's calculated theft from his employer. This wasn't just infidelity, it was large-scale embezzlement. And since we filed joint tax returns, I could easily be implicated if investigators decided I should have known. Next, I turned to his computer, shocked to find it had no password protection. His arrogance in underestimating me had made him careless. His emails provided even more incriminating evidence. Messages to escort agencies detailing arrangements for his trips, complete with casual discussions of services and prices. One particular email chain caught my eye, an exchange from 6 months ago with someone named Jasmine, a coordinator for one of the agencies. Bradley had complained about needing to get creative with his expense justifications due to stricter company audits. Jasmine reassured him, saying they could supply detailed consulting invoices that would pass any review, explaining that many of their corporate clients required discretion and that their paperwork was audit-proof. That confirmed it. The escort service was actively helping him commit fraud, providing fake invoices to cover his theft. This wasn't just betrayal. It was organized criminal activity happening right under my nose. Then I found the document that made my blood run cold, a budget spreadsheet outlining exactly how much Bradley was stealing each month and where it was going. The theft extended beyond escort payments. He had been inflating hotel bills, fabricating client gifts, and creating fake meal expenses, diverting thousands into a secret bank account I'd never known about. That hidden account held over $40,000, money he'd stolen from Nexora Labs and concealed from me. What stunned me further were the payments he'd made using those funds: gambling sites, expensive electronics, and recurring transfers to a woman named Veronica in Las Vegas. I sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the scale of his deceit. This wasn't just cheating or corporate fraud. Bradley had built an entirely separate life funded by stolen money, using our marriage as his cover. I was nothing more than a prop, the unsuspecting wife who made him look respectable and reliable. But as devastating as the truth was, it gave me something he didn't expect: leverage. Bradley had no idea I knew any of this. He believed he was returning home to the same trusting wife who would smile, ask about his trip, and believe every word of his fabricated success stories. I spent the rest of the afternoon photocopying everything, uploading documents to a secure cloud account, and organizing the materials into folders labeled corporate fraud, tax evasion, and personal betrayal. By the time I heard Bradley's car pull into the driveway just before midnight, I had assembled a thorough case against him, one that could end his career and land him in prison. The hardest part was staying calm when he came through the door. He looked tired but pleased, carrying the same easy confidence he always showed after business trips. He gave me a distracted kiss on the forehead, the same perfunctory gesture he'd been using for months, and asked about my weekend in that same uninterested tone. "How was the conference?" I asked, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "Closed 2 big deals and made some useful connections. The company should be pleased." The casual way he lied to my face after everything I'd uncovered made me want to confront him right away. Instead, I forced a smile, nodded, and kept playing the trusting wife for a little longer. I needed more than proof. I needed a legal plan that would protect me and make sure Bradley paid for what he'd done. "That's wonderful," I managed to say. "I'm proud of you for working so hard." He barely acknowledged the praise and headed upstairs to shower off the traces of his weekend. Listening to the water run, I realized the man I'd married had been gone for years, replaced by a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a convenient fool. But that stranger had made a critical mistake. He underestimated how intelligent and determined his supposedly clueless wife could be once she understood the situation. The next few weeks became the most difficult performance of my life. Each morning, I woke beside a man who disgusted me, smiled at his casual lies about work, and pretended to be the naive partner he thought I was. While Bradley carried on as if nothing had changed, I methodically built a case that would ensure his ruin. I began by consulting a divorce lawyer I found through careful research, someone who specialized in financial fraud cases. Catherine Brennan had a reputation for fiercely protecting her clients. When I showed her the evidence, she lit up with professional interest. "This is one of the most complete fraud cases I've seen," she said in our confidential meeting. "Your husband hasn't just been unfaithful. He's committed multiple felonies that could mean serious prison time." "What does that mean for me?" I asked, the fear that had kept me awake spilling out. "We file joint tax returns. Could I be charged as an accomplice?" Catherine shook her head. "Not if we do this correctly. The key is to report the fraud before anyone else discovers it. If you fully cooperate and can show you genuinely didn't know about his crimes, you'll be protected." She laid out a plan that was both smart and ruthless. First, we would document everything, building a timeline of Bradley's fraudulent acts that he couldn't deny. Then we would file for divorce and report his crimes to his employer and the proper law enforcement agencies simultaneously. Timing would be essential. Bradley needed to be blindsided so he couldn't destroy evidence or flee. The goal, Catherine said, was to leave him with no options and no allies. By the time he understood what was happening, his career would be ruined, criminal charges would be pending, and his assets frozen. While working with Catherine, I also started my own investigation. I hired a private investigator, David Cross, a former federal agent who specialized in corporate fraud. David's task was to verify what I had and to look for any additional illegal activity I might have missed. What he uncovered was worse than my worst fears. Bradley's fraud extended beyond escort expenses. He had been running multiple schemes at once, claiming travel costs for trips he never took, submitting receipts for fictional client dinners, and classifying personal purchases as office supplies or promotional materials. "Your husband has stolen well over $100,000 from his employer," David reported at one meeting. "He's been so systematic for so long that he's become careless. There are digital footprints everywhere." David's most shocking finding came when he traced gambling and entertainment charges in Bradley's hidden accounts. The woman in Las Vegas receiving regular payments, Veronica, was not merely a girlfriend. She was Bradley's partner in a side operation that involved selling confidential client data from Nexora Labs to competing pharmaceutical companies. "Industrial espionage," David said flatly. "Your husband has been selling his employer's trade secrets to competitors. This is more than simple fraud now. It's corporate espionage that could lead to federal charges." The scale of Bradley's wrongdoing was staggering. He'd used his role at Nexora Labs to steal funds, sell confidential data, and keep multiple relationships, all while hiding behind our marriage. I wasn't facing only an unfaithful spouse. I was married to a professional criminal operating in plain sight. As proof accumulated, I noticed myself changing. The heartbroken, betrayed wife hardened into someone more calculating and resolute, intent on delivering justice. Bradley had underestimated me for years, treating me as decor while he ran his real life. I planned to prove him spectacularly wrong about what I was capable of. The turning point came 3 weeks after I first found out, while we were in Palm Springs. Bradley announced a business trip, this time to Las Vegas, supposedly for a regional pharmaceutical conference. But thanks to David's investigation, I knew the trip's true purpose, a meeting with Veronica to finalize another sale of client data. "How long will you be gone?" I asked, keeping the detached tone I'd practiced over the past month. "Just 2 nights," Bradley said without looking up from his phone. "Should be back Wednesday evening." Wednesday evening, exactly 48 hours for the plan Catherine and I had prepared. While Bradley was in Las Vegas, completing fresh crimes with his partners, I would begin dismantling his life. The night before he left, I watched him pack, noting the same meticulous attention to appearance that had first made me suspicious. Now the reason was clear. He needed to look like a successful pharmaceutical executive for clients, criminal associates, and escort services who expected that image. "Be safe," I told him as he loaded his suitcase Tuesday morning, words I meant in a way he couldn't fathom. I wanted him safe only until I could finish what I'd started. As soon as his car turned the corner, our plan went into action. Catherine had prepared the necessary legal paperwork: divorce filings citing adultery and fraud, court motions to freeze accounts, and thorough reports for law enforcement. David had compiled his investigative findings into a package that would make prosecution likely. My first call was to Nexora Labs Corporate Security. I'd researched the company and knew they treated fraud, especially theft of client data, very seriously. The security director, Patricia Valdez, agreed to meet that afternoon when I explained I had evidence of systematic embezzlement by a regional director. The meeting was surreal. In a sterile conference room, surrounded by executives and security staff, I methodically laid out the documents and recordings taken from Bradley's office, effectively dismantling his career in real time. Patricia and her team listened, increasingly stunned. "This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases we've seen," she said, echoing Catherine's earlier judgment. "We'll need federal authorities involved immediately, given the industrial espionage element." By Tuesday evening, the trap was in place. Federal agents prepared warrants, Nexora froze Bradley's corporate accounts, and Catherine filed motions to freeze our joint assets to stop him from concealing stolen funds. Bradley had no idea his world was collapsing, that his carefully constructed criminal operation was unraveling while he celebrated with his accomplices in Las Vegas. Wednesday arrived with the crisp clarity of an Arizona morning, and I felt more focused and determined than I had in years. Bradley, convinced of another successful illicit deal in Las Vegas, remained oblivious to the impending collapse of everything he had built. I was completing the final steps of his undoing. At precisely 9 a.m., federal agents arrived at our home. They came armed with search warrants and were accompanied by investigators from Nexora Labs' security division. Leading the operation was Agent Sarah Chen, a white-collar crime specialist who had thoroughly examined all the evidence I'd handed over and deemed it strong enough for several felony charges. "Mrs. Morrison," Agent Chen greeted me as I opened the door. "We appreciate your cooperation. The information you provided has been critical to our case against your husband." As the agents moved through Bradley's office, collecting computers, files, and financial records, I felt a deep sense of validation. Each seized document and hard drive symbolized a small victory, proof that the years of being ignored and undervalued were finally over. Every piece of evidence taken was another strike against Bradley's pride and deceit. Not long after, David Cross arrived carrying more evidence from his surveillance in Las Vegas. His findings confirmed our worst suspicions. Bradley had met with Veronica and sold confidential client data to a rival pharmaceutical company. "We have photos, audio recordings, and proof of payment," David informed Agent Chen. "Your husband received $50,000 for this most recent exchange." Hearing that number, I realized Bradley had earned more through his crimes than through his actual job. The life I'd believed was built on his hard work was, in reality, funded by theft and fraud. Around noon, Catherine arrived with the final legal documents. a comprehensive divorce filing designed to shield me from any legal fallout while ensuring I retained my fair share of legitimate assets. The timing couldn't be better, she said as we reviewed the papers. Filing alongside the investigation shows full cooperation with the authorities and protects your legal rights. But the most satisfying moment came when Patricia Valdez from Nexora Labs called to inform me that Bradley's corporate credit cards had been frozen and his access to company systems revoked. We also found that your husband was about to be promoted to senior regional director, Patricia said. That position would have granted him even greater access to confidential data and a higher expense limit. The irony was striking. Bradley had been on the verge of the biggest promotion of his career, one that would have allowed him to steal even more, and yet his arrogance had brought it all crashing down. As the day went on, I experienced an unexpected sense of relief and empowerment. For years, I had felt myself fading within my marriage, my confidence eroded by Bradley's dismissive behavior. But now, watching his carefully constructed lies collapse, I felt a renewed strength. At exactly 4:00 p.m., the call I'd been anticipating came. Bradley's voice was strained and uneasy, a tone I'd never heard from him before. "Lillian, something's wrong with my corporate cards," he said abruptly. "They're all being declined, and I can't access my company email." I took a slow breath, savoring the moment I had waited for. "That's likely because Nexora Labs has suspended your accounts pending a fraud investigation." The silence that followed was long, so long that I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the $85,000 you've stolen from your employer over the past 3 years, I said evenly. "About the escort services you disguised as business expenses. About the confidential data you sold to competitors. Would you like me to go on?" Another long silence followed. When Bradley spoke again, his voice shifted from confusion to anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said. But despite his bluster, I could hear the fear behind it. "You don't understand how business works." "I understand enough to know you're a criminal," I replied calmly. "I also know that federal agents are currently searching our home. Your employer has dismissed you, and you're facing several felony charges that could send you to prison for decades." There was a sharp gasp on the other end, followed by a noise that sounded like he'd dropped his phone. When he came back, his voice was trembling, almost pleading. "Lillian, please, we need to talk. There are things you don't know, things I can explain. Come to Las Vegas and we can work this out together." "I've already worked it out," I told him. "I've filed for divorce, reported your crimes to the authorities, and secured myself against your liabilities. There's nothing left to discuss." "You can't do this to me," he protested, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm your husband. Everything I did was for us, for our future." "Everything you did was theft," I corrected. "And adultery, fraud, and corporate espionage. You did it all for yourself while using me as a convenient cover for your crimes." I could hear him crying, something I hadn't heard in years. But it wasn't regret for what he'd done to me or his company. It was self-pity. His schemes had finally caught up to him. "The federal agents want to speak with you," I continued. "Get a good defense attorney and turn yourself in before they issue a warrant." "Lillian, please," he begged. "I love you. I made mistakes, but we can fix this together." "You don't love me," I said with certainty. "You loved having a wife too trusting to question your lies." "But that woman is gone, Bradley. She died in a hotel room in Palm Springs when she discovered who she'd really married." I hung up and immediately blocked his number, cutting off his final link to the life he'd been destroying for years. Outside, I watched Agent Chen and her team load evidence boxes into their vehicles, each one a piece of the case that would send my husband to federal prison. Catherine had warned me the next few months would be hard. Cases involving fraud and divorce always were. But as I stood in that house, watching Bradley's lies being hauled away, I felt only relief and a cautious sense of anticipation. For the first time in years, I was free to find out who I really was without the burden of pretending to be the perfect wife to a deceitful man. The next morning brought news better than I could have imagined. Agent Chen called at 8 a.m. "Bradley's been arrested," she said. "We caught him at his Las Vegas hotel, trying to flee the country with Veronica and nearly $200,000 in cash. He planned to escape to a country without an extradition treaty, but thanks to your cooperation, we tracked him down before he left Nevada. He's being held without bail on multiple federal charges." The image of Bradley in handcuffs, his polished facade finally gone, brought a satisfaction I hadn't expected. For years, he treated me like I was too naive to understand his complex business dealings, too gullible to see through his lies. But now, he was learning just how wrong he'd been about me. An hour later, Catherine called with more good news. The court has frozen all of Bradley's assets, including the secret accounts he thought were hidden, she said. We've also secured a ruling protecting you from any responsibility for his criminal actions. Perhaps the most satisfying call came from Patricia Valdez at Nexora Labs. Their internal investigation had uncovered that Bradley's fraud was far more extensive than we had originally believed. We found evidence that your husband had been stealing from the company for over 5 years, not 3, Patricia told me. The total amount, including the industrial espionage payments, was close to $300,000. He had caused more financial harm to Nexora Labs than any employee in the company's history. The scale of Bradley's crimes was shocking, but it also meant my decision to expose him had saved Nexora from potentially millions in further losses. The company's executives were deeply grateful for my cooperation and agreed to offer a significant reward for the information that led to his prosecution. $25,000, Patricia explained. It's not much compared to what he stole, but the board wanted to acknowledge that your actions prevented far greater damage. As I absorbed this news, it struck me how completely Bradley's downfall had unfolded. His criminal career had ended, his freedom was gone, his reputation destroyed, and his stolen money was being returned to its rightful owners. Meanwhile, I was not only safe from legal consequences, but actually rewarded for helping stop his crimes. The irony was undeniable. Bradley had spent years dismissing my intelligence while using our marriage to legitimize his schemes. Now that same intelligence he had underestimated had completely ruined him and given me the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. Yet the personal satisfaction paled compared to what happened once news of Bradley's arrest reached our social circle. Within hours of the story appearing in the local business press, my phone was flooded with calls from friends, neighbors, and colleagues, all shocked to learn about my husband's double life. Lillian, I can't believe it, said Janet, one of our neighbors who had always seemed slightly envious of our lifestyle. Bradley always looked so successful, so stable. How did you not know what he was doing? The question stung. It suggested that a good wife should have seen the signs. But through my sessions with Catherine, I had learned enough about manipulation and abuse to recognize the victim blaming hidden in that question. Bradley was very skilled at deception, I replied calmly. He spent years constructing an elaborate facade to conceal his crimes. I trusted him because that's what partners do in healthy relationships. What surprised me most was how many people admitted they had their own suspicions about Bradley but had never voiced them. My friend Carol confessed that she always found his frequent work trips unusual. My design colleague Marcus mentioned that he'd often wondered how we could afford our lifestyle on Bradley's stated income. Even my hairstylist said she'd noticed how dismissive Bradley could be during my appointments, the way he'd talk over me and act as if I wasn't there. We all noticed things, Carol admitted during one conversation, but you seemed happy, and it didn't feel like our place to interfere. Learning that so many people had harbored doubts about Bradley yet stayed silent was both validating and frustrating. It proved that his behavior had been visibly troubling to others, yet it also revealed how isolation functions in abusive relationships. Bradley had built an environment where I questioned my own perceptions, while those who might have helped stayed quiet out of politeness. Now, those same people were eager to show support and admiration for my courage in exposing him. The woman once dismissed as naive and oblivious was suddenly being praised for her intelligence and bravery in bringing down a sophisticated criminal. You're incredible, said my former college roommate, Sarah, when she called after seeing the news. I always knew you were smart, but taking down your own husband's criminal empire? That's real courage. Her words felt gratifying. But what truly uplifted me was the growing awareness that I was finally free to shape my life without Bradley's constant criticism and control. For years, I had diminished myself to fit his idea of the ideal, supportive wife, suppressing my ambitions and passions to preserve his comfort. Now, with that weight lifted, I was rediscovering parts of myself I'd long forgotten. I started small. I rearranged the house to reflect my preferences instead of Bradley's, removing his pretentious art and replacing it with pieces that resonated with me. I cleared out his office and turned it into a real design studio where I could grow my freelance business. I even bought new clothes that I liked, not the ones Bradley would have chosen. Each change felt like reclaiming a lost piece of my identity. 2 months after Bradley's arrest, I received an unexpected call that became one of the most satisfying parts of my entire revenge. The caller was investigative journalist Rebecca Torres from the Phoenix Business Journal, working on a detailed expose about corporate fraud in Arizona's pharmaceutical industry. "Mrs. Morrison, I've been following your husband's case," she said. "I'd love to interview you about your role in exposing his crimes. Your story is extraordinary, and I believe it could help others spot similar red flags in their own relationships." The idea of publicly sharing my story was both intimidating and tempting. Part of me wanted to stay private and move on. But another part, the one that had been silenced and underestimated for years, wanted the world to know exactly how I dismantled Bradley's criminal operation. "What would you like to know?" I asked. "Everything," Rebecca replied. "How you discovered his crimes, gathered evidence, and cooperated with law enforcement. But most importantly, I want to show how a woman everyone overlooked became the key figure behind one of the most extensive fraud prosecutions in state history." The interview happened the following week at Rebecca's downtown Phoenix office. For 3 hours, I walked her through every step of my journey, from suspicious wife to determined whistleblower, detailing how I uncovered Bradley's deception and built the case that destroyed him. Rebecca was especially intrigued by the psychological side of the story, how Bradley used manipulation and gaslighting to sustain his schemes while keeping me compliant and unaware. "Your husband created a textbook case of financial abuse," Rebecca noted. "He controlled information, belittled your intelligence, and weaponized your trust. But once you saw through him, you used those same tactics to expose him." 2 weeks later, the article titled, "The Wife Who Brought Down a Criminal Empire: How One Woman's Intelligence Destroyed Her Husband's $300,000 Fraud Scheme," appeared as the Business Journal's cover story. Rebecca's piece was masterfully written. She presented my journey as both a warning about financial abuse and an empowering example of how victims can reclaim their strength. What made the article truly meaningful was that it didn't cast me as a lucky survivor, but as a capable, strategic woman who had outsmarted a career criminal. The article portrayed my investigative efforts, collaboration with law enforcement, and strategic decision-making in a way that emphasized my competence rather than my victimhood. Morrison's precise and analytical approach to collecting evidence and constructing her case displayed a level of strategic intelligence one would expect from a seasoned investigator. Rebecca wrote that her husband had spent years believing she was too naive to uncover his criminal schemes. Yet Morrison demonstrated that intelligence and persistence can be far more dangerous to a criminal than mere suspicion. The response to the article was overwhelming. I received countless calls and emails from readers eager to share their own experiences with financial abuse or to express admiration for my actions. Several law enforcement agencies contacted me to ask if I would speak at training sessions about identifying financial fraud. Even a literary agent reached out, suggesting I write a book about my experience. However, the most unexpected response came from Bradley himself. 3 days after the article's publication, I received a letter through Catherine from Bradley's federal detention center. In it, he expressed outrage at my decision to go public, accusing me of destroying what was left of his reputation for personal gain. "You didn't need to humiliate me publicly," he wrote. "Haven't you done enough damage already? I'm facing decades in prison because of your betrayal. And now you're profiting from my downfall by giving interviews." The letter so perfectly reflected Bradley's narcissistic mindset that I almost laughed while reading it. Even while facing federal prison, he still saw himself as the victim and me as the villain. He couldn't grasp that his own deceit, theft, and betrayal had finally caught up with him, exposed by the very wife he had long underestimated. I chose not to respond to his letter, but I did share it with Rebecca, who later quoted excerpts in a follow-up article discussing how financial abusers often continue blaming their victims even after conviction. Meanwhile, my own life began improving in ways I hadn't foreseen. The publicity from Rebecca's piece brought in several high-profile design clients, including 2 pharmaceutical firms impressed by my role in uncovering corporate fraud. My business was expanding faster than ever, partly because I no longer had to schedule around Bradley's travel plans or social expectations. Then came an unexpected job offer from Nexora Labs themselves. Patricia Valdez reached out to discuss a position in their corporate security division, focusing on fraud prevention and employee education. Your investigative insight and understanding of financial crime would be invaluable to our team, Patricia explained during our meeting. Having someone with your experience lead our training programs would demonstrate our commitment to preventing future incidents. The irony of being offered a position by the company Bradley had defrauded was too fitting to decline. I accepted the role, which came with a generous salary, strong benefits, and the deep satisfaction of knowing I was now helping to prevent the very crimes my ex-husband had committed. As I cleared out the last of Bradley's possessions from our home, ready to reclaim the space entirely as my own, I reflected on how completely our circumstances had reversed. Bradley now sat in a federal prison, his reputation ruined and his assets confiscated while I was building a new career, expanding my business and uncovering strengths I never knew I had. The woman he once dismissed as too naive to grasp complex business matters was now being paid to educate professionals on recognizing and preventing financial fraud. 6 months after Bradley's arrest, I sat in a federal courtroom watching him plead guilty to multiple felonies in what prosecutors called one of Arizona's most extensive white-collar crime cases. The man who once mocked my intelligence was now in prison attire, being led away in chains. Although his sentencing was set for the following month, his attorney had already informed the court that he faced between 15 and 25 years in federal prison. As part of the plea agreement, he was required to repay Nexora Labs in full and forfeit all assets linked to his crimes, including the secret accounts he believed I would never find. Judge Patricia Whitman, who presided over the case, made several remarks during the hearing that filled me with a profound sense of justice. Mr. Morrison's actions were not spontaneous mistakes, but a deliberate and ongoing pattern of theft and fraud that lasted for years. The prosecutor noted that the defendant had not only betrayed his employer's trust, but had also endangered his own wife, who could have faced serious legal risks because of his criminal behavior. As I watched Bradley finally take responsibility for his crimes, I couldn't help recalling the patronizing tone he used when explaining why I wasn't capable of understanding his work. He used to dismiss my questions about his expenses and business trips as ignorant interruptions in matters too complex for me to grasp. The same man who had insisted I was too naive to comprehend financial concepts was now admitting before a federal judge that he was a fraud, who had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from his employer. After the hearing, Agent Chen met me in the courthouse hallway with an update that gave me the closure I needed. "Veronica, your husband's associate in Las Vegas has agreed to fully cooperate with our investigation," she told me. Her testimony revealed that Bradley had been planning to expand his illegal activities by recruiting other pharmaceutical executives to sell confidential data. My actions hadn't just stopped his current crimes, they had prevented a much larger conspiracy. Realizing that I had stopped Bradley from spreading his corruption and turning individual deceit into an organized network gave me an unexpected sense of pride. My decision to trust my instincts and carefully build a case against him had not only protected Nexora Labs, but potentially shielded the entire pharmaceutical sector from an advanced espionage scheme. Catherine, my divorce attorney, handled my case with the same strategic precision she had used to defend my legal rights, delivering the final blow to Bradley's arrogance. The divorce, finalized the previous month, awarded me the house, both vehicles, and most of our legitimate assets. Bradley was left only with his legal debts and restitution responsibilities. When he tried to argue that I should share his legal expenses because I was the one who exposed his crimes, Catherine told me with satisfaction that the judge literally laughed, calling it the most absurd request he'd heard in 2 decades on the bench. But perhaps the most gratifying outcome was how my professional life transformed after Bradley's downfall. My position at Nexora Labs opened doors to consulting work, corporate partnerships, and invitations to speak at conferences on fraud prevention and security. The woman Bradley once dismissed as too naive for business was now being recognized as an expert in financial crime detection. Last month, I spoke at the National Association of Corporate Security Professionals annual conference in Denver. My presentation, titled "When the Threat Comes from Within: How Personal Relationships Enable Corporate Fraud," was attended by over 300 professionals from companies nationwide. Standing on that stage, explaining how I uncovered and documented a sophisticated fraud operation, I felt genuine accomplishment not from revenge, but from realizing my own capabilities. For years, Bradley had convinced me I was intellectually inferior, that my worth was confined to domestic and emotional support. Yet by dismantling his criminal network, I had proven my analytical thinking, investigative skills, and professional competence to law enforcement and corporate leaders alike. That conference also led to an unexpected personal chapter. I met David Harrison, a security consultant from Seattle, who had worked on a similar case involving trade secret theft. David was intelligent, ethical, and refreshingly direct. Everything Bradley had pretended to be but wasn't. Our conversations revealed shared values in both professional integrity and personal honesty, qualities my marriage had lacked. When David suggested we stay in touch, professionally and perhaps personally, I realized I was finally ready to imagine what a healthy relationship could look like. 3 weeks later, David flew to Phoenix for what began as a business consultation but soon became something deeper. For the first time in years, I was speaking to someone who respected my ideas, valued my insight, and saw my intelligence as an asset rather than a threat. "You know," David said over dinner one evening, "reading about your case convinced me that sometimes civilian investigators are more effective than professionals. You had insights no outsider could have seen." His words meant more than he could have imagined. After years of being dismissed and underestimated, being recognized as a capable investigator by someone I respected felt like the final validation I needed. Bradley ultimately faced the full consequences of his actions. 2 decades in federal prison, his reputation in ruins across the pharmaceutical industry, his attempts to rebuild his life were destroyed by the scale of his crimes and the thoroughness of my documentation. Former colleagues, friends, and relatives learned the truth through public records and news coverage, leaving him isolated and disgraced. His financial obligations to Nexora Labs and his other victims ensured he would leave prison with nothing. As I looked ahead to a career in corporate security, to new relationships based on respect and honesty, and to the understanding of my own strength, I realized that exposing Bradley's crimes wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming my identity and recognizing the abilities I had long ignored. In the end, the most powerful response to betrayal was refusing to remain the person someone else tried to make me be.